Let's talk about the real reason you feel so magnetically pulled to someone who barely communicates with you. Someone who shows up today and vanishes tomorrow. Someone who gives you just enough to keep you hanging on. You think you're in love, but the truth is harder to swallow. You're addicted, not to the person, but to the pattern they've created. There's a reason your nervous system lights up like a Christmas tree when they text you after going silent for days. There's a reason your stomach drops when they don't reply, even if you pretend not to care. And it's not just emotional, it's chemical. That unpredictable pattern of attention and withdrawal is triggering the exact same neurochemical response as addiction. Well, let's get scientific for a moment. The brain thrives on prediction. We're wired to seek patterns, structure, certainty. But when someone communicates inconsistently, when they leave you on red one day and pour on affection the next, your brain doesn't feel secure, it feels confused. And in that confusion, it starts chasing resolution. It gets stuck in a loop. When will they reply? What did I do wrong? How do I get them back? Now here's the dangerous part. Every time they do respond, every time they give you that sliver of warmth, that unpredictable reward, dopamine is released in your brain. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter of anticipation. Not satisfaction, anticipation. You're not high when they love you. You're high when you hope they might. You're not addicted to them. You're addicted to the relief they bring when they end your anxiety. That hit of "they haven't forgotten me" becomes your drug. It soothes your panic temporarily, but it never resolves it. Because the same person creating your emotional starvation is also the one giving you crumbs to survive. And your nervous system is now trained to believe that this is love. This is why healthy communication, people who show up consistently, who respond with clarity, who speak openly, feels boring at first. It doesn't trigger the highs. It doesn't spike the cortisol and then soothe it. It doesn't make your stomach flip with anxiety. So you think, I'm just not feeling a spark. But what you're really saying is, my trauma doesn't recognize this as love. We need to stop romanticizing chaos. We need to stop confusing addiction with intimacy. Because what you think is passion is often just emotional dysregulation. You're not bonded because you're soulmates. You're bonded because they activate your unhealed wounds. This is why you overthink every text, why you analyze their tone, why a single emoji can ruin your day, because you've been conditioned to chase connection through anxiety. And here's the brutal truth. People who communicate like this, who keep you in limbo, who give and withdraw affection on a whim, are not doing it accidentally. Whether consciously or not, they're training your nervous system to equate their inconsistency with value. Think about that. You begin to see their unpredictability as depth. You start believing their silence is mysterious, that their avoidance is strength, that their crumbs are a sign of love, when in reality, it's a psychological power play. The more confused you are, the more control they have. And the more control they have, the more you chase. This is how emotional addiction works. It's not about connection, it's about control. And here's the most devastating part. You start participating in your own emotional starvation. You wait longer. You text less, hoping they'll miss you. You shrink yourself, trying to stay cool. You start playing games to keep someone who never even played fair. But what if I told you that you could rewire your nervous system? That you could unhook from the high of anxiety and learn to recognize calm as love? That you could stop needing the emotional roller coaster to feel alive? Because here's the truth. Love isn't supposed to be confusing. Real connection doesn't make you question your worth. Healthy communication doesn't leave you on edge, waiting for reply like your dignity depends on it. You deserve a relationship where consistency feels like safety, not boredom. Where clarity is the language of love, not silence used as punishment. It starts with awareness. When you can name the pattern, you stop being controlled by it. When you recognize that your body is chasing a chemical loop, not a person, you can start to break free. And when you finally reclaim your power, you stop settling for crumbs from people who were never ready to feed your soul in the first place. So if you're feeling stuck, ask yourself, are you really in love? Or are you just addicted to the person who made you forget how to love yourself? And when you can answer that honestly, everything changes. There's a psychological trap that keeps millions stuck in toxic dynamics, and most don't even realize they're in it. It's the illusion of emotional depth that's born not from presence, not from true vulnerability, but from scarcity. We've been wired to believe that what is rare must be valuable. So when someone speaks little, reveals less, and disappears often, we unconsciously inflate their significance. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That person who barely opens up, who gives you glimpses of their world, fragments of their truth. And somehow those fragments feel more powerful than full transparency from someone else. Their silence starts to sound poetic. Their vagueness becomes mystical. You start telling yourself, they must be a deep soul. They just don't know how to express it. No. What they've actually done is something far more manipulative, whether they realize it or not. They've allowed you to do the heavy lifting of connection. They've given you so little that your mind is forced to fill in the blanks. And your imagination, fueled by longing and hope, paints them as this enigmatic, emotionally profound being. But here's the catch. Mystery is not the same thing as depth. Real emotional depth requires courage. It takes effort, it shows up, it expresses, it confronts, it connects. It's not about how little someone says, it's about how honest. And the more invested you are, the more you tolerate emotional starvation in the name of hope. Let me ask you this. Would you tolerate this level of ambiguity in any other area of your life? Imagine going to a job where they pay you sometimes, no schedule, no feedback, just the occasional, hey, good job, followed by a week of silence. You'd quit in a heartbeat, but emotionally, you stay. Because this isn't about logic, it's about addiction. And your mind confuses the pain of uncertainty with the thrill of attachment. It gets even deeper. We don't just romanticize mystery, we equate it with meaning. So if someone shows you their soul too easily, you devalue them, you call them too available. But if someone is distant, cryptic, hard to read, you chase, you assume their love must be more valuable because it's harder to access. It's not, it's just more expensive emotionally. Now, some people really are private, they're thoughtful, they process things before they speak, but you'll know the difference between someone who is intentional with their words and someone who is withholding connection as a way to control you. One makes you feel seen, the other keeps you guessing. And the person who keeps you guessing is not drawing you closer, they're holding you hostage to your own fantasy. This is the soul trap, the place where people confuse emotional chaos with emotional chemistry, where they confuse a spark with a pattern. And what's fueling it isn't love, it's scarcity. The less they give, the more you feel the need to earn it. And now you're not showing up to build a relationship, you're showing up to prove your worth. But here's the truth no one wants to say. Depth is not something you chase, it's something you experience in the presence of truth. Real love speaks. Real connection communicates. It might be awkward, it might be messy, but it shows up honestly. It says, here's who I am, here's what I feel, and I'm willing to risk being seen. That's the kind of emotional depth that sustains intimacy. Not mystery, not silence, not breadcrumbing disguised as complexity. So the next time you find yourself drawn to someone who rarely speaks, ask yourself, are they really deep? Or have I just dug a hole for myself trying to understand them? Because you can drown in shallow water if you keep convincing yourself it's an ocean. And if you want depth, real depth, it begins with you. Speak honestly, show up clearly, and stop worshiping the people who vanish behind silence. Because love isn't found in confusion, it's found in clarity. Let's strip away the illusion for a moment. Because this goes deeper than just wanting someone to text you back. Deeper than needing them to say the right thing at the right time. What you're really craving beneath the surface, beneath the longing, beneath all the analysis of their messages, is permission to feel worthy. And here's the hard truth. You don't love their words. You love the feeling you get when they validate your existence, when they break the silence, when they finally notice you again. That tiny ping on your phone, that brief flicker of attention, it's not just a text, it's relief. Temporary relief from the anxiety that's been burning in your chest for hours, days, maybe weeks, because when they respond, it feels like proof that you haven't been forgotten, that you're enough, at least for now. That's not love. That's emotional bargaining. That's a nervous system trapped in survival mode. You see, what no one tells you is that your addiction to their communication isn't about connection, it's about significance. You've tied your sense of self-worth to how this one person sees you or doesn't. And that puts all your emotional power into their hands. You've made them the gatekeeper of your inner peace. Now let's go even deeper, because most people don't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to make this person the source of my validation. No. It happens gradually, often unconsciously, especially if you grew up not feeling consistently seen or emotionally safe. When love felt like something you had to earn, something you had to work for. So now as an adult, that same familiar emotional chase feels like love, and the person who communicates inconsistently, who shows affection only in moments and withdraws the rest of the time, they mirror that original experience. They awaken that deep psychological wound that says, if I can just get them to love me, then I'm lovable. If I can get a reaction, then I matter. This is why you overthink your texts, why you reread their messages looking for clues, why you wait by your phone, refreshing, checking, second-guessing, because their attention, however limited, is the signal you've been trained to chase. And when it arrives, it feels like oxygen. But the problem is, you're still suffocating because you're depending on external validation to breathe. And now here's where the emotional cost gets brutal. Every time you bend, shrink, or silence your own needs just to get a moment of their affection, you're not just hurting your boundaries, you're rewriting your self-worth. You're teaching yourself that your value is transactional, that love must be earned through silence, suffering, or performance, that you must do something to be worthy of a response. But let's be honest. How many times have you been left emotionally empty after they finally responded? You waited, you hoped, you obsessed. And when the message came, it was underwhelming, vague, casual, even dismissive. And you told yourself, it's okay, at least they said something. That right there, that's not acceptance. That's self-abandonment. We've got to start telling the truth about how these dynamics form. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend it's about love. You start to realize it's about wounds. And that person you're chasing, they didn't create your insecurity, they just activated it, which means they were never the solution, they were just the mirror. If you're waiting for their words to fix your worth, hear this. You'll wait forever. Because no one can give you the validation you refuse to give yourself. It's not their job to make you feel whole. That's yours. And it begins the moment you stop looking to broken communication for emotional salvation. Healthy love doesn't feel like relief from panic. It feels like peace. It doesn't make you beg for clarity. It offers it. It doesn't leave you starving for scraps. It feeds your soul without condition. But you won't even recognize that kind of love until you disconnect your self-worth from emotional breadcrumbs. Until you stop needing their words to feel like you're enough. Because the moment you start validating yourself internally, their silence loses its power. Their inconsistency stops controlling your emotions. Their approval becomes irrelevant to your peace. You stop living for the next reply, and you start living from a place of self-respect. That's when the addiction ends. That's when the pattern breaks. That's when you reclaim yourself. So I'll leave you with this. If their words are the only place where you feel worthy, then it's not love you're chasing, it's permission. And you don't need permission to matter. You just need to remember who the hell you are. One of the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves in these kinds of relationships is this. We're meant for each other because we understand each other's pain. But what we fail to realize is that a bond formed in pain isn't always a bond built for growth. Just because someone mirrors your wounds doesn't mean they're aligned with your future. That's not destiny, that's trauma chemistry. Here's the psychological truth most people never confront. We don't always fall in love with people because they're good for us. We fall for them because they're familiar. And familiarity, especially when rooted in childhood emotional patterns, can be seductive. You didn't just fall for that person because of who they are today. You fell for the way they made you feel something you felt before. Unseen, unsure, unsafe, and desperate to earn love. When someone communicates in a way that triggers your abandonment issues, it doesn't always repulse you, it pulls you in. Because it subconsciously reminds you of the very dynamics you once had to survive. You might think, this feels intense. This must be real love. But the truth is, it just feels familiar. It scratches an itch your inner child has been carrying for decades. You start to bond not through shared values or a vision for life, but through emotional survival. Their silence triggers your need to prove yourself. Their inconsistency awakens your deepest fear of being discarded. And suddenly, you're not relating to them as a grounded adult. You're relating through the lens of a child trying to earn a parent's attention. That's the difference between a healthy attachment and a trauma bond. A trauma bond feels urgent, chaotic, intoxicating, but it's not intimacy. It's repetition. It's the subconscious trying to rewrite the past through the present. If I can finally get this person to love me, maybe it proves I was never unlovable. But no relationship can redeem your childhood. That healing doesn't come from them. It comes from you. This is why we tolerate behavior we know isn't right. This is why we ignore red flags we'd warn our best friend about. Because we're not just responding to what's happening now, we're reliving something old. That's why the pain feels so deep. That's why the silence feels suffocating. That's why you keep showing up even when all logic tells you to walk away. Because your mind thinks this isn't just about this person. It's about proving to yourself that you're worthy of the love you were denied before. And the emotional high of getting a little affection from someone who's mostly distant, it feels euphoric because it feels like redemption, but that euphoria is short-lived. Because you're still not being loved fully, you're just being temporarily relieved from your own rejection wound. That's why the cycle keeps repeating. That's why no matter how many times they come back, it never feels like enough. Because the real wound hasn't been healed, it's just being triggered over and over again. So let's break the fantasy. You are not bonded because you're soulmates. You are bonded because your trauma patterns align. One person is afraid of closeness, the other is afraid of being abandoned. One withdraws to feel in control, the other chases to feel secure. And both keep playing roles they didn't consciously choose, trying to win a game that no one ever wins. But here's the truth. Love that's rooted in fear isn't love, it's dependency. It's the nervous system mistaking familiarity for safety. And if your connection depends on anxiety, tension, or the constant fear of loss, you're not in love, you're in survival. You have to start asking different questions. Not, do they love me, but do I feel safe with them? Not how do I keep them, but why do I feel the need to chase someone who doesn't choose me, clearly? Because when your standards rise to meet your healing, you'll stop calling emotional chaos a connection. Here's the most powerful shift you can make. Stop looking for someone to finish your story. You don't need someone to rescue you from your past. You need someone who joins you in creating a new future. And that requires bonding through truth, through presence, through shared growth, not through unhealed wounds. So if you're stuck in something that feels magnetic but makes you smaller, ask yourself, is this love or is this a pattern I was taught to crave? Because the difference between destiny and damage is awareness. And here's your moment to wake up. You didn't bond because it was meant to be. You bonded because a part of you still believes pain is the price for love. It's not. You're sitting with your heart pounding, second-guessing every word you said. You're obsessing over whether your last message was too much. You're in mental overdrive, analyzing silence like it's a riddle with a secret answer that will finally make them choose you fully. Meanwhile, they're calm, silent, detached. But here's the brutal truth. They're calm because you're doing all the emotional labor. You're holding the weight of the connection. You're fueling it with your effort, your overthinking, your emotional energy. You're the one keeping it alive, hoping that if you just show enough loyalty, enough patience, enough grace, they'll finally meet you in the middle. But the middle isn't coming because what you're experiencing isn't a mutual connection. It's a psychological imbalance that has tricked you into believing that your over-promotioning will eventually lead to love. Let's go deeper into the psychology of what's happening here. In any relationship, there's a dynamic of pursuer and distancer. It becomes toxic when the pursuer believes they must do more to be chosen, and the distancer learns they can do less and still be kept. And what keeps that cycle alive? Your anxiety, your need for resolution, your internal story that says, if I can just prove how much I care, they'll finally see me. You're pouring your energy into decoding their signals while they're doing nothing to decode yours. You're showing up every day with emotional currency, hoping they'll invest even a fraction back into you. But they won't. Not because they can't, but because they don't have to. They've learned they can stay distant and still stay desired. They've learned that the less available they are, the harder you'll try. And so instead of creating clarity, they create confusion. Not maliciously, but because that's what works. That's what gives them control without commitment, power without participation. And let me tell you something, emotional labor is invisible when you're the one doing it. You think it's love, you think it's loyalty, you think it's strength, but it's not. It's exhaustion disguised as devotion. You've become the emotional scaffolding for a structure that was never built to support you. And while you're climbing, fixing, adjusting, hoping, it's collapsing. Not because of your effort, but because it was never mutual. You're the only one working to keep it standing. So let's name this pattern for what it is. You're in a relationship where your anxiety is the engine. Not love, not alignment, not shared values, just anxiety. Yours, not theirs. And that anxiety is feeding a cycle that leaves you drained, desperate, and perpetually waiting for something that never arrives. And the longer you stay in this cycle, the more you lose sight of the fact that real love isn't a performance. It doesn't require emotional acrobatics. It doesn't make you prove your worth through silence, guessing games, or emotional endurance. Love shows up. Love shares the weight. Love speaks not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's hard. You are never supposed to carry both sides of the relationship. You were never meant to chase someone while managing your own insecurity. You were never designed to be the emotional caretaker of a connection where the other person refuses to take responsibility for even their own feeling. Because here's what happens when you stop doing all the work. The relationship reveals itself. When you stop texting first, when you stop chasing, when you stop initiating every conversation, every repair, every moment of connection, you'll finally see the truth. The connection dies without your effort. It was never alive to begin with. And yes, that realization will sting. It'll hurt. Because you weren't just fighting for love. You were fighting for validation, for identity, for closure. But pain is better than illusion. Truth is better than tension. And peace is better than chasing someone who never planned to meet you halfway. You don't win in a relationship by working harder than the other person. You win by recognizing when you're the only one working at all and walking away. Because you are not here to carry emotional dead weight. You're here to be met, not managed. To be seen, not studied. To be loved, not tolerated. So here's the bottom line. If you feel like you're doing all the emotional work, it's because you are. And if someone is calm while you're crumbling, it's not because they're emotionally evolved. It's because they're emotionally absent. Let them keep their calm. You go claim your power. At some point, you've got to stop romanticizing silence. You've got to stop calling emotional distance maturity and inconsistency mystery. Because what you're dealing with isn't some poetic soul who's too deep to express themselves. It's someone who has made a habit of being emotionally inaccessible. And in most cases, it's not accidental. It's a design, a protective strategy, a way to stay in control without getting close. Let's be honest. The person you've been waiting on, obsessing over, interpreting like a cryptic book, they're not complicated. They're just closed. And here's the mistake most people make. They confuse closed with complex. But complexity involves layers, thought, intention. Being closed off doesn't make someone complex. It just makes them unavailable. And the more unavailable someone is, the more we tend to chase. Because the human brain equates effort with value. We think if I'm working this hard for their attention, it must mean they're special. But you know what's actually happening? You're doing all the work to unlock someone who never planned to let you in. And their silence, their detachment, it gives them the upper hand while you drown in your own emotional projection. Let's really talk about what emotional unavailability looks like. It's when someone dodges vulnerability with charm, when they answer your questions with vagueness, when they share stories but never truths, when they're present in body but absent in spirit. They never fully show up, and yet they give you just enough to keep hoping that they will. This is why your nervous system stays on edge, because you're trying to connect to someone who's deliberately keeping you in emotional limbo. They won't let you get close, but they also won't fully let you go. It's a power play disguised as personality. And the longer you stay, the more you confuse the pursuit with purpose. The more you start thinking your love can fix them, that your patience will eventually break down their walls. But here's what no one tells you. Walls don't keep out love. They keep out responsibility. When someone refuses to open up, when they ghost instead of communicate, when they withhold affection to maintain control, that's not because they're healing. That's not because they're too deep to express themselves. It's because they've learned that staying emotionally unavailable gives them the illusion of safety and often the advantage in relationships. And you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is proven by your persistence. That if you can just be more understanding, more patient, more flexible, you'll finally get the love you deserve. But let me ask you something. Do you really want a relationship where you have to decode feelings like they're a puzzle? Do you want to spend your energy pulling truth out of someone who resents giving it? Do you want to build your life around potential instead of partnership? Because here's the hardest truth you'll ever face in this kind of dynamic. You don't love who they are. You love the fantasy of who they could be if only they'd open up. And that fantasy is powerful. It gives you hope. It gives you a goal, but it also keeps you stuck because every time they go silent, you romanticize it. You think they're deep, they're scared, they've been through so much, and that may all be true, but that doesn't make them ready, and it doesn't make them yours. There is no relationship where love should feel like a scavenger hunt. You shouldn't have to search for clues to know where you stand. You shouldn't have to earn someone's openness like it's a reward. You shouldn't have to translate silence into affection. Because real love is not hidden behind emotional puzzles. Real love communicates even when it's hard. Real love shows up. It speaks truth. It takes risks. It doesn't sit behind walls expecting you to scale them to prove you're worthy. You don't need another emotionally unavailable person to project your love onto. You need someone who chooses to be available on purpose, not because you begged for it, not because you waited long enough, but because they're emotionally mature enough to meet you where you are. So stop calling it mystery. Stop calling it depth. Stop calling it a challenge worth pursuing. Start calling it what it is. Emotional inaccessibility disguised as romantic allure. Because if they were truly deep, they'd know that silence isn't soulful, it's selfish when it costs someone else their peace. And you're done paying for someone else's emotional walls. So here's what I'll leave you with. You don't need to solve the riddle of someone who won't open up. You need to stop trying. The person you're meant to be with won't need to be unlocked. They'll hand you the key and say, "Come in, I've been waiting."